What is art?
Art is
history.
What is art? That's a good question.
This is Art Uncovered.
Art is our collective cultural history.
A weekly podcast that brings you interviews with an eclectic mix of artists and creators.
Art is
disappointing your parents.
I'm your host, Kimberly. Happy Tuesday, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Art Uncovered. This week, I am honored to be here with Franky Frances Cannon, an interdisciplinary writer, educator, artist, and editor who is the Mellon Science and Nature Writing Fellow at Kenyon College. Over the course of the conversation, we talk about Franky's merging of art and writing, her visual book reviews, and her book, Walter Benjamin Reimagined, which was recently published by MIT Press. Stick around. Welcome back, listeners. Thanks again for tuning in to this week's episode of Art Uncovered. This week, I am so excited to be here with Franky Cannon. Franky, thanks so much for joining us today. It's great to
having me.
See you. And listeners, I did say see. We are posting this conversation on YouTube as well as audio-only platforms like Spotify and things like this. So if you would like some references for visuals that Franky and I will be talking about over the course of the conversation, feel free to check us out on YouTube at Art Uncovered Podcast. All right, so Franky, I am so excited to talk to you. Your work was so interesting. So you have this really interesting practice where you successfully found a way to merge writing with visuals. And I read in your bio and just in the brief correspondences that we had on social media that you have an MFA in creative writing. And is it 2 bachelors that you have, one in poetry and one in printmaking?
No, just one. Those were my areas of study.
Concentration. Great. Yeah. So I'm curious. So obviously you have training in both writing and visual art. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about maybe your relationship with writing and art. And I'm especially curious at how you came to create this path for yourself. Were you able to kind of merge these 2 disciplines?
I think it's a great question, and I am always still trying to answer that question. So I'm glad that from the outside, it seems as though I've found the answer, but it is still a work in progress and most likely always will be. I do think that academia and the publishing world and the art world are very siloed, and people love categories. And I'm always trying to blur them, not necessarily on purpose, but just that I'm drawn to many different disciplines, and I always have been. And so sometimes it is intentional where I'm like, well, I want to create a hybrid form. And then at other times, I just can't really help it. I'm an artist and a writer. And so it's hard for me to, maybe some might say it's hard for me to focus on just one or in a more positive light, I think I'm good at both, and they both come naturally to me. So from the beginning, I mean, I'm one of those really annoying people who will say, I've been writing and making art since I was little, since I could hold a pencil or whatever, but it is true. And I think I was lucky that my family encouraged both to some extent, encouraging me to make art and write poetry and stories from a really young age.
Oh, that's great. You had that support.
Yeah, it is. And particularly my grandmother, Helen, who was a professor of creative writing. She, cool. from a really young age, she would read through my writings, my stories and whatnot, and edit them, which I think is, maybe some might think is a little intense. She would actually take a red pen and edit my 10-year-old story.
I love this. What was your perception of that when you were 10?
I think we were so close. She was like my best, well, I don't know. She was a best friend of sorts. She was a really good confidant and a really good support system, but it was kind of, it was a little intense to have my stories edited at that time. I think I had, the first story I remember was about a little girl falling into a hole inside of a tree and finding another realm, which sounds quite like so many other stories. It seems like a familiar trope. And so she recognized that, and she said something like, write what you know. So basically write creative nonfiction, write what you see right around yourself.
Oh,
And now creative nonfiction was my master's degree is specifically in nonfiction. So I guess she really influenced me there.
oh,
But,
that's so wonderful. Yeah, you
yeah.
mentioned that you're interested in a lot of different things, and one thing that I noticed was this interest in science and science writing. Could you maybe talk about how that kind of fits into everything?
Yeah, absolutely. And I realized I went on a tangent about my grandmother, which often happens, but
And that's
it
good. Yeah, that's good. I love those anecdotes.
oh good. This
Yeah,
question also I can connect it back because it's a
that's
similar
great.
reply, but just I guess I have a breadth of interests and hopefully some of them have depth, but that I am always trying to like pull in um, topics and themes and modes and materials that I'm interested in and weaving them together. And so um, science and nature are some of those topics that I'm really interested in, but I look at them through the lens of a writer and an artist. So I don't have a degree in science. I am not a scientist, but I guess I'm an amateur scientist, amateur nature enthusiast. I love foraging for mushrooms and looking at wildflowers and trying to identify trees, but I'm a novice, and yet I've been a novice my whole life. So at least I have a lifetime of enthusiasm to bring to that. And that also has been inspired by my family. So Helen, as well as my grandfather and
Yeah.
my grandfather on my maternal side as well, all my grandparents and aunts and uncles and my mom and dad, everyone loves botany
Oh, very cool.
and mushrooms. So that has been a really strong base. And now I just came across this amazing fellowship that I'm currently in that is science and nature writing um, at Kenyon College. And so it's a really unusual interdisciplinary position.
Hmm.
I'm glad that they have come up with it and that it's still, I think for Kenyon, it's still kind of it's in development because it's rare in academia to find that interdisciplinarity.
Yeah,
Um,
is it currently in the like the English department or is it in the science department? Where does it live?
it's in the English, well, it's housed in the English department, but I say I have a lot of bosses and they don't call themselves my
Okay.
bosses, but
Yeah.
I have people supporting me in biology and English, and then I also have this crew of science and nature writing interested folks who are in a writing and reading group that I help to organize, and it's anthropology and philosophy and creative writing.
Wow, this is so
Um,
cool. What are some
yeah.
of the books that you're reading in that group?
Well, so we started last semester and we read Katie Holton's The Language of Trees, which I really
Okay.
love.
Yeah, and I
Which
want to get back to that one because I think you wrote and illustrated a review of that book. Is this true?
I did. Yes,
Yeah,
good.
yeah. So I want to come back to that one. I just want to make a mental note
Okay,
there. But yeah,
great.
what other books did you read in that group?
Well, so that was our core text in the fall, and then it's
Okay.
also a writing group. So we stretched it out, and then each week we also have each person in the group contributes, well, if they want, it's optional,
Okay.
an excerpt from something they're writing, and it's science and nature themed. So some people are bringing in nature poems, and some people are
Oh,
bringing
this is so
in
great.
really awesome sci-fi, like short stories about slime molds on other planets. It's amazing. And so we also read
Wow.
those.
Wow. Did they like create this position with you in mind, or was it some like magical happenstance that you came upon this job posting?
I know it does seem that way that it was created for me, but it's no, it was I'm the second fellow. So the
Okay.
fellowship was just one person previously, and um yeah, I think it was the brainchild of a few folks who already have this interest. So my boss Chris, one of my bosses, Chris Gillen, in biology, is also a poet, and he maybe he wouldn't actually call himself that, but he took a creative writing workshop and was really excited about it, so he's
Okay.
interested. And then Sergey in the English department, who is also one of the editors for the Kenyon Review, just really is interested in science and nature and mushrooms. And so I think it was a few folks who, and also the provost or the president. Kenyon is just like, everyone's really interested in science
Oh, I love this.
and writing.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I didn't create it, but I kind of fell into it. And yeah, I wish that it would last forever, but it's only a 2-year position, so
Oh,
I'll
I see.
take what I can.
Is there a teaching component to that position?
Yes. So it's the fellowship is kind of, it's partly that like community curricular building and planning, so the meetings and strategizing for the future. And then the other aspect is teaching. And the other aspect is, so it's like 30% planning, teaching, and then 30% writing and research. That doesn't
That's
add up
great.
to a full
That's
100%,
great.
but
Yeah.
about. I'm not a mathematician.
Yeah.
The teaching is also within science and nature writing, and so I have been able to design my own classes in topics that I'm interested in, and it's so this semester I'm teaching a class called Queer Flora, Fauna, and Fungi,
That
which is
sounds
really fun.
fabulous. What is the gist of this class or the focus of this class?
Yeah, the focus is kind of finding the intersection between queer theory, creative nonfiction, science writing, and science. So I
Wow,
made that
this is so
distinction of
cool.
like creative nonfiction, but specifically about science and nature, and traditional science writing. So writing about um, biology, botany, and mycology, and lichenology and all the related fields. It's great.
This is very exciting. Now, I'm curious because a lot of our listeners are around like the graduate school age or shortly after graduate school. And I know for myself, when I was applying, because I was also an interdisciplinary artist, I have a degree in journalism, photography, video. And one of the challenges that I faced when exiting grad school is how to kind of gear like my letters towards um, towards their call when I have so many different interests. So did you have like a certain technique or how did you find a way to kind of craft your interests into fitting for their department perfectly? You know what I mean?
Mhm. I think it's a great question, and I wish I had a really amazing answer for all the listeners out there who are trying to write letters, but I'm still in the middle of that, in the sense of I feel great now that I have this position,
Mm-hmm.
but there will be a next step, and I don't think that there
Yeah,
are
right.
positions at other schools that are tenure track, more permanent in science and nature writing. There might be, if
Mm-hmm.
someone's listening to this podcast and wants
Yeah,
to hire
reach
me,
out.
great.
Yeah. I'll get you
But
all in
so
touch.
yeah, and so each time I apply for a position or job, I really just I have to kind of pick and choose. Like if I were to give my whole backstory, all my different jobs and experiences and all the things I've studied for each job, it would just be overwhelming. So I usually just filter some of my interests for a particular position, and then if they're curious about the others, I can tell them. So for this position, I didn't emphasize the visual art, which is
Oh,
equally
interesting.
important to me.
Yeah,
But I
interesting.
more emphasized the science and nature writing. Although it's hard for me to hide the art because that it's all over my website, and fortunately one of the committee members really liked my graphic nonfiction, so like the reviews and some
Yeah,
of
I'm
the
actually going to do a screen share with your website here so that we could kind of look at some visuals while you're talking there. So you mentioned the one of the was it someone on your committee that was really interested in your visual reviews?
yeah, and it may be more than one person, but I guess it's just this, maybe the lesson comes back around to you can try to tailor yourself to a particular position, but maybe it is best to just
Mm,
show your whole self.
mm.
That was very cheesy, but
I love it.
good. So yeah, that's what happened, I guess, is that I presented my interests in writing about science and writing about nature, and also my background is in graphic literature, so writing illustrated or graphic book reviews, and also all of my books are hybrid and I think we'll talk about that, but the example that you're showing now is my graphic review of the aforementioned book by Katie Holton, The Language of Trees. And
Actually, maybe before you go forward, for those listeners who are not watching on YouTube but who are only experiencing this through our words, so you mentioned your graphic reviews. Now, what is a graphic review?
yeah, there's a lot of these forms that hybrid or interdisciplinary artists have to either come up with words or try to fit words to what they do because they're in between genres. So I think that's true for a lot of graphic work, like graphic reviews or graphic poetry. Sometimes they're called visual narratives or visual poetry. So things that include art and text. Yeah, sometimes they're hard to label. So a graphic review is basically a visual review, which is similar, like I could call it an illustrated review, but the text and image are all integrated. So instead of just typed text accompanied by an illustration, it's all together on the same page. And it's my handwriting, and then the artwork usually is rarely do I do just digital. So it's usually paint, pen and ink, or marker, or colored pencil, whatever I happen to be using. And I love making graphic reviews of books that I'm reading. I read a lot, and I read, yeah, I'm a voracious reader, and I read across different genres. And I think that creating graphic reviews helps me process what I'm reading. And it's usually like I'll take notes while I'm reading, and I have post-it notes in all the books that I read, and I underline them. I'm bad. I kind of destroy my books. But then after the fact, in order to then synthesize for myself and maybe for others as well, what I've read, the graphic review helps me. It's literally visualizing it, but also interpreting it through the dual form of text and image. And then sometimes the graphic reviews are they're, yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to explain it. Sometimes they're commissioned. So like a friend will ask me to review a book, a new book of poems or something, or it's just a book that I know is like hot off the press and therefore maybe could be published somewhere because it's just another form of a book review. And so usually they're books I love, and sometimes they're books I feel on the fence about. So
Oh,
yeah.
yeah, interesting. And so I have never seen a visual or graphic review before. Is this process or genre unique to you, or are you part of like a longer lineage of graphic reviewers?
Yeah, there aren't, well, I am not the only one. There aren't that many active, I think, creators of graphic book reviews, but I can name a few sources. Rhino Poetry has recently published an amazing collection of graphic reviews.
Oh, cool.
And some of them are, yeah, some of them are a little more lyrical, poetic, interpretive, and then some of them are like mine. Basically, here's a book, here's what it's about, here is my interpretation. And so I guess I'm I'm more straightforward. And that was edited by, it was guest edited by Kylie Galatly, who's a visual poet. And so visual poetry is another one of those realms that is hybrid and kind of hard to describe sometimes.
Right.
But yeah, Kirsten Radke is also another graphic book reviewer. And yeah, I would have to go through because I guess it's a rare form,
Yeah, I
but I
love
am
it.
not the only one.
Yeah, I love it. Now I'm curious. I also wrote a title of a book that you published. It was titled "Like a Little Dog: Andy Warhol's Queer Ecologies" by Anthony Grudin. Can you tell me a little bit about maybe this book and your process of creating the review for it?
Yeah. So that book, I'm trying to think of the process of how I decided to create a graphic review of the book. in short, a friend of mine was working for a journal and requested that I write something, a graphic review or a review of something, not specifically that book. And I happened to be reading that book anyway. So I was like, it's recently published. I love it. And it's really unique. And so I wrote this graphic review for a specific journal, kind of by commission. And then it turned out that this is actually very common. It turns out that the editors couldn't process or did not want to think about the hybridity. They didn't want to publish an interdisciplinary book review.
Okay.
And so there was some miscommunication there. And so I just submitted it to someone else and they took it. So it is kind of, yeah, it is harder, I think, to publish. I know that it is harder to publish hybrid work, and especially hybrid work in a genre that is really unusual. And so anyway, the process was a little funny, but it eventually found a home. And yeah, the book is art history and art theory and specifically a profile of Andy Warhol. And it's a really intense book. Andy Warhol is just so bizarre, as everyone knows, but this book in particular highlights some of his ecological philosophy, I guess, and his artwork that he created about non-human animals and plants, but also about his sexuality and queerness and kind of deviance, his sexual deviance. As I think that's the word maybe I wouldn't have used, but it's in the book, and it's fascinating.
So, Franky, I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit about some of your other published work, because you are pretty published. It's really impressive. You have a book that was published by MIT Press, the title of which is called Walter Benjamin Reimagined, a graphic translation of poetry, prose, aphorisms, and dreams. Oh, look at that. Perfect. Yeah, can you tell us about this one? That was the one that I wrote down by title. So I would love to hear more about this.
Yeah, I decided before our talk to just grab a stack of my books.
Oh, I'm so glad.
So I could show them.
Yeah.
Yeah, this book is it started, the seed of the book started in grad school, and I was taking a seminar. I think the title was Melancholy Books, which is so
I would take that
silly.
class.
Yeah. Well, and it's also just it's funny that all of us were kind of depressed anyway, and it was wintertime in Iowa City, and we're all in this really dark themed class, and we're drudging through, and yeah, anyway, it was just quite an experience. And we read all sorts of amazing authors, but one author that came around the periphery, we didn't directly read Walter Benjamin. Someone in the class was maybe bringing him into the conversation in relation to Marguerite Duras, or we were also reading W.G. Sebald. It just came into the conversation, and I was intrigued. I had heard his name before in reference to his most famous essay, I think, Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction.
Yeah.
And I hadn't read it. And so I thought, well, if I'm going to be part of the conversation, the graduate school conversation, but also this particular class, I better do my homework. And the piece that they mentioned was the Arcades project, which is his maybe longest work, but unfinished by the time of his death. It was kind of fragmentary. And he was doing research about like the underground markets of Paris and architecture, history, bits of poetry.
Yeah, it was kind of like snippets of like notes and things like this, right? It wasn't like a carefully crafted narrative. It was kind of piecemeal. It's a fabulous collection. Yeah.
Yeah. So I strangely started there. I started reading the Arcades, which I think most people would have started with something that he intended or that he did publish during his lifetime, like his essays, which are so well known. Anyway, and that I just became really fascinated and read all of his published work All
Wow.
of his work that has been translated into English. I do not read or speak German, but he also wrote in French, and I can read some French. And so I was reading in mostly English, a little bit of French. And then he wrote, as maybe you can tell from my title, which is a graphic translation of poetry, prose, aphorisms, and dreams. He wrote all sorts of genres, art theory and poetry and stories, fiction stories. He wrote about his dreams. All sorts of philosophy. So yeah, I dove in, and then I created a graphic essay. So basically, I think the first essay that I interpreted through drawing, which is kind of like a graphic translation, I guess, was, I think, The Collector, which is one of his essays. And then once I had that, I think I did this method of mine, which does not always work. In fact, most often does not. I just sent it to publishers. Is maybe not recommended. I mean, yeah, everyone give it your best shot, but it's not the standard practice.
Did you send like you completed the book and then just sent the whole thing to them?
No, that would be amazing. I just sent the one essay with a pitch.
Okay.
So I had only created one essay before I started pitching, so I was ahead of myself. And fortunately, people liked it. But
Wow, that's amazing.
I've tried that with other projects, no response. And so it's really luck, I guess, luck of the draw. And also I happened to send it to a handful of publishers that were really interested. I think maybe because Walter Benjamin is kind of a hot item in philosophy, but he's not as frequently written about, I think, as, like, I don't know, Susan Sontag, or, he's in the margins a little bit of the common discourse, except in certain like academic circles. So for that reason, I think it was just unusual enough. And the fact that it's a graphic translation of his work, that the editor that I contacted, at the acquisitions editor at MIT.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yes. Yeah. So MIT Press has amazing designers. So they put it together in a way that it looks very professional. The manuscript was just my illustrated text and my handwritten text. And then they encouraged me to add a typed forward, and also I invited 2 authors to join. So Esther Leslie and Scott Bucatman added a forward and a afterward. And then my work, I'll pick a
this
page
is
here.
so great. Look at that.
Thanks. My work is all like pen and ink and handwritten text.
Oh my gosh, I love this so much.
Thanks. So they are, it's fragments of his work, interpreted through my drawings.
Fragments of his work, meaning like quotes from his essays.
Yeah, and they're not always full sentences. So truly fragments. I'm pulling some of his phrases from poems, dreams, essays, and the book is divided into different eras of his life, but also different themes that I pulled together. So it's not necessarily chronological. And so there's a whole essay here unpacking my library, and that is my it's a more coherent my whole graphic essay is an interpretation of his essay, but other sections are more fragmentary, like a stroll through the arcades. I was picking and choosing concepts and phrases from the arcades and then interpreting them and pulling them together. So
this is so fabulous. Question, so I would love to get a copy. Is it something that we could get through like MIT or something like this?
Yeah. MIT, the website, if you just look up my name, Frances Cannon, or my name and Walter Benjamin, or if you just look up Walter Benjamin MIT. I think you can find it.
Perfect. And I'll make it easier for you all. I'm just going to include a direct link. I'll include a direct link on social media and also on our website and all the places. Yeah, 'cause it's such a beautiful just object too, even before you get into the meaning of the words. It's so fabulous.
Thank you. And I was so happy with the publishers who decided to make it hardbound, which I just think is so delightful, and gold
It's so
gold
great.
lettering on
Oh
the
my God.
binding. You know,
Nailed it.
Yeah.
When was it published?
2019, I believe, or
Okay.
18. It was a blur.
Wow.
It was so much
That
work that year just fell
Yeah,
into the
yeah.
abyss.
So that was you did that before you started working at Kenyon, obviously.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a strange process. I was just describing this to a friend earlier this month, and I realized if I do a project like this again, I need to step it up because I did not have a scanner, and I scanned every single page at the public library. It was so silly. And then I would like email myself the files, and I didn't have Photoshop or Illustrator, and so I edited
Oh, I
each one
love
of those
that about
illustrations
it.
using the free preview app on my Mac.
Oh my God.
So
That's what
bad.
you meant by stepping it up.
I'm not saying the book is bad. The book is good. I'm just
Oh,
saying my process was very,
I
I
love
created such a difficult process for
yeah.
myself.
Yeah, and I think your workflow could have sped up a bit if you had more of the tools at home. But
Yes. Next time.
that is fabulous. Wow. And you know what? Even like I don't know. Actually, I'm curious. Like I know my smartphone has like a scanner thing that kind of if you just take a picture of something instead of taking a picture, it actually scans it at really high resolution. So I'm sure even the technology from 5 or 6 years ago makes things like that a little bit more accessible from
Yeah,
home.
next time. Oh boy.
Oh my gosh. Well, this is so exciting. Frances, thank you so much for speaking with us and for sharing your work. And I promise I'm going to order, and I'm not just saying this, like I am actually going to order this book.
Oh, I'm
And
so glad. I hope you like it.
oh, I'm so excited. Yeah. So listeners, if you also want to do the same, like I said, I'll include links on all the places that you find us. So Franky, thank you again so much. It was such a pleasure.
It's been a wonderful conversation.
All right, listeners, that's all for this week. Please be sure to tune in next Tuesday as I will be speaking with Allison DeBritz. Allison is an artist and educator whose work intimately considers the gendered paradigms of domestic spaces and relationships. Over the course of the conversation, we talk about Allison's work with found images, photography, and collage, and her media's relationship to conversations surrounding women's reproductive rights. Hope to see you all next time. Have a safe week. Bye-bye.